Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Yashovardhan Azad, recently retired from the Indian Police Service, having reached the top echelons of the service as well as from the Central Information Commission, and Sidharth Luthra, a senior advocate of the Supreme Court. Gentlemen, welcome to the Print Debates. Today we're discussing, and I'm going to try and connect several threads across the security, intelligence, and social spheres. It's been a very interesting weekend, lots of stuff that's happened. First, right on the ball, was the extension to the chiefs of the CBI and the Enforcement Directorate. Ordinance by the Government of India has extended their services from 2 to 5 years, although every year they're going to get an extension, of course. Then there was a couple of days ago by the National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, comments made at the passing out ceremony of police officers, where he talked about civil society being a new frontier of war. And then on Sunday in Assam, 2 young women journalists were detained by the Assam police, ostensibly because they had been reporting on alleged incidents of vandalism in Tripura, which the Ministry of Home Affairs has denied. The women journalists were reporting that vandalism had occurred allegedly in a mosque in northern Tripura, and the Tripura police has denied that. So I'm trying to connect these several threads. Mr. Azad, if I can ask you to go first, do you see a connection between all these sort of several seemingly disparate incidents that have occurred over the weekend?
First, let me say I'm extremely disappointed with the 5-year extension or the fixity of tenure for these 2 ED chiefs and the CBI.
Okay.
It looks like it's detracting from the dignity of the post because, the important clause there to watch is extendable each year. That's very, very unfortunate. Now, the fixity of tenure was there earlier. They had 2 years each. It could have been made even 3 years. But it should be a fixed tenure of 3 years and not extendable every year. That's extremely unfortunate. The other thing is just before a parliament session, and therefore bringing ordinance of this kind, it appears very, very strange to me. And let me say also on this point that it looks like, if you're making it 5 years for the ED and CBI, then why not 5 years for all your chiefs? Because the IB and RAW chief are already on extended tenure of 1 year. And mind you, the Supreme Court had said with respect to the ED chief that giving an extension after retirement is something very funny, and it did not take it very nicely. So I think this is an absolutely wrong move, and I'm most disappointed. Okay. Number 2.
Yeah, Mr. Azad, let's just take incident by incident. So, Mr. Luthra, can I ask you to come in here? Your comments on the ordinances extending the terms of the ED and the CBI chiefs, and also I wanted to ask you, do you think that this is a government that's being ruled by ordinance? Because we saw in 2014 how one of the first ordinances to have the principal secretary at the time, Mr. Mishra, was also an ordinance. So your comments on that?
No, I don't think it's a government ruled by ordinance. They have a large majority in parliament, so they really don't need to be troubled by ordinances. Governments who have a minority or who are a combination of different political parties may need to rule by ordinance. This government does not need to.
Okay.
Having said that, I must point out that I'm quite perturbed by the extension of authority to 5 years and extendable by 1 year. The whole purpose of giving them a 2-year tenure, the chiefs of these agencies, was that they will be independent of action and there will be independent functionality. The fact is that independent functionality has not entirely been achieved because of the balances that exist where all decisions for even filing a petition are vetted by the Law Ministry and the DOPT. So really there's no independence in that sense. Secondly, and the other problem that is very crucial from my consideration is, as Yashovardhan pointed out, you have an extension every year. So the person is dependent on the powers that be. So that really kills all, or damages the whole concept of independence. The third issue is 5 years. There's a serious concern about the functionality of some of the investigating agencies, and whether it be dissent or a variant view in any sphere of life, political, social, economic, we should not have a situation where agencies become unbridled tigers, uncontrolled tigers. They're already somewhat uncontrolled, but my fear is for the citizen. There is also, as you would be aware, a challenge to some of the procedures or the lack of procedures under the legislations, especially governing the SFIO, the ED. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because they operate essentially in a no man's land. While they are bound by procedures the CBI is bound by, they should be, that's what the law says, but they operate in a very opaque manner, and the citizen rights are often cut down in the manner of their functionality. This manner of functionality is under challenge in the Supreme Court. Add to that this 5-year issue, I'm quite concerned as a citizen, as a legal professional.
So let's talk about specifics. When you say that you're concerned as a citizen, and this question is to both of you, but first you, Mr. Luthra, the specifics of it. Are you concerned that the ED is going after people who seemingly there is no reason for them to go after them? And let's talk about the former State Bank of India chairman, Mr. Pradeep Chaudhary, but that's just one example. What are your specific concerns?
I don't want to comment about Mr. Pradeep Chaudhary because I have represented him in connected matters. The issue really is that when you give anybody unregulated power, there has to be play in the joint, there has to be scope for independence in investigation and discretion. But if you give them unregulated power, then you are creating a mechanism for arbitrariness. Today, the difficulty that we face with agencies which are operating in these gray areas of the law, so to speak, is that they act in an arbitrary manner. And while it's not about individual specific, it is that their authority is capable of large and is often a matter of abuse of authority.
Okay.
And that needs to be redressed. And the only way that can be redressed is by legislation and regulation of their functionality.
All right.
No reason, I'll just add, there is no reason why the processes of the CRPC, which are applicable to the police and to the CBI, should not be applicable to the ED or similar agencies, because if you apply them, the safety of the citizen is protected.
Okay, Mr. Azad, you've been a top police officer, you've served across the country, and I have two questions to you. The first is that the National Security Advisor, Mr. Doval, over the weekend, also a former police officer like yourself, said to the passing out badge of the Indian Police Service a couple of days ago, and I'm going to quote from his speech, where he says the quintessence of democracy doesn't lie in the ballot box. It lies in the laws made by the people elected through those ballot boxes. You are the enforcers of those laws, and if you fail to implement them, then they are as good or as the bad can be. And then he calls this civil society the new frontiers of war, the fourth generation of warfare. It is civil society that can be subverted, that can be suborned, divided, that can be manipulated to hurt the interests of the nation. Your comments on this?
I think it's the fifth generation, as I know. It's not the fourth generation. But anyway, very interesting comments. Let me just say that the first part I agree with. There is a huge problem about problems in the social setup, cleavage, fault lines, which are being developed by very irresponsible statements by various people. I agree with that.
Like what?
In fact, I'll tell you, like public disinformation is a great issue. You had a lot of Twitter handles which had to be closed down from Pakistan on the 26th January when the farmers' agitation was taking place and they had landed up in Dreadfort. So there is a system of the rogue states trying to create problem within your society. I agree with that the police should be very, very cautious. Like in that case, they had banned the Twitter handles. But I also thought that Mr. Doval should go a little further and say that, but also statements on the social media should not be trampled upon, because democracy should always be there. I mean, democracy cannot be trampled upon. So what I mean to say is, while the first part, the public information warfare has been going on for a long time, propaganda, Goebbelian propaganda, or the Hitler's propaganda, which was going on in Germany to create fault lines within the society. That is a threat to the society, and it is absolutely understood very well. And the police should take action against them. But police cannot take action against people, against their right of expression, which is a constitutional right. I wish Mr. Doval had gone to the other part also, because while police is supposed to prosecute, it is also supposed to protect.
Mr. Azad, can I ask you about the detention of these two women journalists? They were reporting in Tripura. So when they were on their way out of Tripura, they've been now detained by the Assam police. So in this particular case, these two women were reporting on alleged vandalism of a mosque in northern Tripura. An FIR by the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, which is a part of the RSS, has been lodged against these two women journalists. Now, what kind of policing is this?
See, I think there has to be a context in which we discuss this. And I think the most important thing is the veracity of the report, which is being put out by the journalists, because this has not only happened in Tripura, it also happened in UP, where the two journalists from Wire were also arrested or given a notice by the police. And they said that, we went according to the report we had received. So obviously they didn't have any mens rea, a bad mind to create any problems. Similarly, this is what has happened in Tripura. The Tripura police and MHA stand by the fact that there has been no vandalization of the mosque. Now, this is a fact which can easily be verified. And I think the opposition should have also played a very important role and suggested to the government that let's see if the mosque is vandalized or not. Because if the government is so sure, then there should be no issue. But on the point of this arrest, of course, thank God they have not been arrested under UAPA. They have been arrested under, creating 153A, Sidharth.
Disturbances, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So, but there are 102 people whose Twitters or whose, statements on the social media have been taken upon adversely, and they have been under a UAPA Act, which is unfortunate. But I would still maintain that this is an issue which should be seen in a broader context, because in Tripura, what had happened was as a reaction to what was happening to the minorities in Bangladesh. And therefore, the government itself should have been very strict with these kind of processions, which may generate violence, because it had another reaction in Amravati.
Right. But the question, Mr. Luthra, is that isn't the government, in this particular case, let's talk about Tripura. As Mr. Azad said, there were incidents against the Hindu minority community in Bangladesh, and that has supposedly had a reaction in neighboring Tripura. So, but to slap charges of the UAPA, which is a terror charge against lawyers, civil society activists, now, isn't that just going, completely overboard?
So I want to answer, I want to deal with what Yasho said first, and then I'll come to this. The first part is that the first part of the statement by Mr. Doval was in his capacity as a police officer, and I don't think anybody can find fault with obeying the laws. The second part is probably because of his career as a spy, which is natural suspicion of anybody outside their scope of functionality. And I don't blame him for that statement, but I don't agree with it. The fact is that today, social sector or the NGOs operate in every sphere of life, whether it be healthcare, whether it be in legal aid, whether it be in rehabilitation work, whether it be employment. They are there in every part of our life, and therefore we must acknowledge the work that they do rather than denigrate the work that they do. There are always aberrant actors who will use corporate structures, whether it be a society, a trust, or a company, to perform illegal acts. Prosecute them, but don't castigate the sector completely. That's absolutely unfortunate that the person holding the office of the NSA has come out at a public and a guidance to young police officers. I'm really troubled by that.
But can I just ask you, Mr. Luthra, Mr. Doval's sentence where he says the quintessence of democracy doesn't lie in the ballot box. Of course, he goes on to add that it lies in the laws made by the people elected through those ballot boxes. Although, I mean, it seems to me a somewhat contradiction in terms, because if you're elected through those ballot boxes, then you are also in parliament and hopefully legislating on some of these issues. So what do you make of that?
The last I remembered was that democracy was for the people, by the people, and of the people. I don't know how his statement squares in with that. Really, eventually we elect our representatives to enact laws as the nation wants them. The representatives are not supposed to enact laws which the nation does not necessarily want. And by that, I mean laws in conformity with the Constitution. They can't have arbitrary laws. All laws after Maneka Gandhi's case must meet the test of Article 14, 19, and 21. They must be just, fair, and reasonable. They cannot be arbitrary laws. You can't have a situation where you have laws which curtail the liberty of a citizen arbitrarily. You can't have that. That's settled now. And that wonderful decision of ADM Jabalpur has now finally been put to rest in the privacy case, 9 judges. Having said that, I want to address the second part of what you had talked about, and that is the issue regarding what happens in other jurisdictions, that is in Bangladesh, and its reactions in India. Every person who is elected to public office, every minister, chief minister, MLA, is to A, uphold the laws and the Constitution, B, ensure that they act without fear or favor. And when I mean uphold the Constitution and the laws, and that's part of the schedule to the book they have to take, the fact is you are responsible as elected representatives for law and order. You cannot allow any section to create a situation where individuals or communities or classes of citizens are targeted. Now, the fact is, it's not that we have a country with varied regions, peoples, communities, castes, religions. Mm-hmm. But targeting is a problem because that is a failure of the state to protect its citizens.
But why is it slapping charges like the UAPA, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, a 1967 law, against civil society activists? And that's my connection with Mr. Doval's speech. Lawyers and now 2 journalists have been detained. So the civil society sphere there's an attempt to police them, if you like.
Look, I must tell you, on that, I would tend to agree with Yashovardhan. We don't have all the facts here, but the point that I want to make also is, if there is an abuse of either social media in terms of an incitement to violence, or the vocalization of your sentiments crosses the borders or the limits of the law,
yes,
it will have to be legal action. You cannot prevent it. That's where the law comes in. And
UAPA? Something like UAPA?
The UAPA can be interacted if there is incitement to violence. Please look at the UAPA. I have defended it on both sides. I appear as a prosecutor in some matters, and I appear as a lawyer. The UAPA was brought in. The UAPA is not an old new law. There's a 1908 law, and then the UAPA came in, and the UAPA has gone through various amendments and revisions, even in the previous decade. So let's not, just because it's a law, just hold on. Just because it's a 1967 law, we can't rubbish it. After all, we apply the 1860 Indian Penal Code, and we don't question it only because it was made in 1860. There's a law in 334 countries.
Okay. And Sedition Act also.
Sorry?
Listen.
What I just wanted to say, Jyoti, was this. Yes. The point today is, there is indeed an enhancement and an increase of application of laws under the guise of security of the state. And those numbers have gone up substantially. The question that needs to be asked is, can you routinely apply provisions such as sedition, such as UAPA, against any individual, irrespective of whether they're civil society or not, merely for voicing a dissent? And that's the question we need to ask. Today, am I not as a citizen entitled to bring to the notice of the state that you have failed in your duty to protect individuals and that you are continuing to fail, or that you are giving support to actors who are damaging the social fabric of our state?
So that's the question.
Has to be protected. That has to be protected. And it is time that people of the eminence of Mr. Doval should also sensitize police officers that the freedom of speech and expression may have reasonable restrictions, but application of coercive processes arbitrarily is not reasonable, and it is not a valid restriction.
So that's a question, Mr. Azad. Do you think that police officers, your own biradari, is it trying to police civil society much more routinely, if you like, than it has been done before?
I think the police leaders, the IPS leadership the generals have to be liberal. The police leadership has to look at the larger dimension. What are we actually for? We report to the law, but we also defend the Constitution. We apply the law, but we also look at the freedom of speech. We don't only prosecute, but we also protect. Okay. So actually the application of these laws, I think the UAPA or Sedition Act, look at the conviction rate, it's 2%, 3%. So the application of these laws cannot be done in a routine manner. And even, using a UAPA for this in the journalist case is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, 102 handles, was it an incitement to violence? But one thing is true, as Sidharth says, if you look at the reading of the Sedition Act or the UAPA Act, you can actually apply it anywhere. In many cases, it can be applied, which is really unfortunate. But in the case of Tripura, there were some reports which started by saying Tripura is burning.
Yeah, that's right.
There were a few flashpoints. So some of those statements, if you see some of those lines, it could lead to incitement. It could lead to aggravation of some of the community's feelings.
But Tripura is burning attracted a UAPA charge against the journalist Shyam Mira Singh. I mean, isn't that a bit excessive, Mr. Azad?
A little excessive. But what I'm saying, even the journalists themselves should be able to sort of contain themselves before they go overboard about reporting something. Be factual. Especially, I'll tell you something. During my days, I remember as DIG Bhopal, I had excellent relationship with there was an element of trust begets trust. So I would tell them everything, and I would say, see, this is the sensitive part because of the communal angle, but I leave it to you whether you'd like to publish it or not. If I were you, I would not. 99% of the cases, they would sort of comply.
You're talking about media.
Yeah, but that is because when trust begets trust. Today, that trust seems to have broken down. And that is because more and more of cases of this kind, which need not be there. And I'm sure, people say that there are pressure, but if you don't do it, I don't think there is any pressure of that kind, unless you really want to stick to a post for more than 5 years, as per this ordinance, as they say. So in case of Tripura, I don't agree, but I will also say that some of the statements by the journalists were inflammatory. Okay. Not calling for UAPA, of course.
Okay, so inflammatory, but crossing the line, you would say, but perhaps not necessary that UAPA should have been slapped on them. Mr. Luthra, you had a point to make.
Yeah, I think, there's an issue which needs consideration, which is the excessive application of sedition in UAPA and similar provisions, even at the state level. And this is, I've said this publicly earlier, this is across the states, irrespective of which dispensation is in power.
So why are they doing this?
This is the question that you need to ask the state actors, that why across different state governments provisions of sedition are being used. And the courts are occasionally coming down heavily on it. They're used against individuals, against
very, very occasionally, Mr. Luthra. That's the point. The courts are not coming down heavily on it enough.
Courts
And
have.
you had to take the Aryan Khan case right up to the High
But
Court.
just a minute. Look, let's not mix Aryan Khan.
All right.
It's a different matter. The point is, I don't agree with you. The courts are coming down heavily on it.
Yes.
And they are coming down heavily on it. And not in just one case, but in different cases. They've come down. They came down in Tamil Nadu. There was a stay granted when Nakiran was sought to be, the Gopal Nakiran was sought to be prosecuted. The matter was finally quashed by the High Court. Supreme Court initially stayed, then vacated the order, sent it back to the High Court, so the stay continued. The Supreme Court has stayed investigations on a writ against.
Not enough. The Supreme Court.
You have to approach the court. Jyoti. If people don't approach the court.
The lower judiciary is infamous for throwing people into jail and for letting them languish there.
I don't think so. I think that's not a correct statement. I'm sorry, I really can't subscribe to that. The lower judiciary doesn't throw people in jail. The fact is that when there are restrictions of a excessive kind in certain laws, the hands of trial court judges are tied. High Court judges now, and only recently by a recent decision of the Supreme Court of the Chief Justice, can grant bail, applying their authority under 21, even where there are the infamous twin restrictions on the grant of bail, whether it be in the case of UAPA or NDPS otherwise. But that is a power that is now recognized by judicial precedent only with the constitutional courts. The trial court judges are bound by those provisions and their hands are completely tied and restricted.
Okay.
So let's not castigate them unfairly.
Right. Okay, the question to you, Mr. Azad, the point that Mr. Luthra raised, why do you think state governments, political parties across the spectrum, as well as law enforcing authorities, why are they invoking these very big, sort of strong charges, strong laws like the UAPA or sedition on, relatively innocent cases or relatively less important cases?
I think there are two reasons. One is that across the states, there has been a deficit of governance. Across the states, I think they have not been able to meet the basic people's demands in terms of growth, in terms of employment, in terms of other public delivery, which should be there for the people. And secondly, it is also because some of the chief ministers want to establish their supremacy and their authority and try to prove that here is a system which is running. And that is, for example, what is happening in UP. Now, you would obviously say that how does it transcend down the line, does not transcend up. And some of the police officers are more willing to be appliant in the system to be able to do this. And some of them are highly enthusiastic. Somebody like Wankede is very, very enthusiastic, investigator who go to deal with it. And third is the problem with the system itself, as a lot of things need revision, which we, of course, don't do. And therefore, it's an unfortunate trend. But I'll tell you something. My last point is that many of the institutions we have created, whether it's the CBI, whether it's the ED, whether it's the state, whether it's so many things, there has been particularly a lack of proper choice for the leadership. Leadership is extremely important. The way we select, at that particular point of time, there is no cry from the media. I tweeted, for example, openly for the first time, that Yashovardhan, who should have been the IB chief, has been moved out as CISF chief. He was the best and the finest. But there is no outcry. Nobody says anything about it. So I think in India, even people don't stand by the right people and the rights. People who are thrown out by the side, nobody speaks for them. So if nobody speaks for the right people, then the states are going to do what they feel like. And that is what is happening in the country.
Well, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there, but there's so much to talk about the right to dissent, especially in the civil society and in the civil spheres. But gentlemen, thank you so much for your time, Sidharth Luthra and Mr. Yashovardhan Azad. Thank you again.
Thank you.